All right, welcome to my talk on dissent and diplomacy. So we're going to look at the question that's gained some urgency this year. What do you do when you're a diplomat or you want to be a diplomat and you're really out of sympathy with the current government or particular policies, right? So we're going to start with what I grandiosely call the Heflin doctrine, which is this. I think the world works better and is at peace when even the smallest countries have good diplomats, have the best diplomats. I think things work better when we and China and Russia and Europe all have great diplomats. But I've seen smaller countries in Africa, for instance, really do good work. I saw Burkina Faso basically stop 2 wars in its neighborhood. Think about what Qatar's been doing over the last couple of years. Just really, that's a small country. It's going to have a small diplomatic establishment, but they've been doing yeoman's work in trying to bring it into the Gaza conflict. So the world works best when everybody has good diplomats. And there's a corollary to the Heflin doctrine. This country cannot afford to have 2 foreign services. One that works when Democrats are in office and the other when Republicans are in office. None of our friends and none of our allies do it this way. If we start doing that, we're sunk diplomatically. Okay? So because of that, I encourage people who are thinking about entering the State Department to do it. And also those who are there to stay, if possible. And how do you do that if you're out of touch with the policy? Well, we're going to walk through 5 options that are available to American diplomats. Most of these are available to people in other organizations too, both American and overseas. But the 2 bottom line rules, I would say, are you don't ever want to do anything that violates the law. And you don't want to do anything that violates your conscience. Now, there's a difference between disagreeing with a policy and it violating your conscience, right? So let's look at the possibilities. The first option is, there's the doctrine and the corollary. I don't have the trademark on this yet, but I will. 5 ways to dissent. The first one, which I call salute. Just follow it. Why? Well, for one thing, you're pretty junior, right? You're doing one of those first 2 tours where mostly you're doing your visa work. If you're in a different organization than the State Department, you're doing what's basically your apprenticeship, learning your trade. You're not anywhere near big policy decisions. Your staying or resigning is not going to affect that decision. Second element that has to be necessary in this is that you're not being asked to violate your conscience or the law. We'll come back to that with almost all the options. And the other is this. It may not be a policy that you work anywhere near. You know, do you really want to fail to join the government or to leave the government because the policy towards, let's say, Ukraine, you're not in agreement? Were you ever going to work in Ukraine? Were you ever going to work in Eastern Europe? No. Then you really just have educated views like any good citizen. And I would say at that point, you just say, this is above my pay grade. I'm staying. Second, use your voice in the decision-making process. Now, I'm familiar with the workings of some other countries' foreign ministries and with the military here in the U.S. This is where you say, hey, look, sounds like you guys are making a decision here. I'm not 100% comfortable with it. What do you think about this? What if we did it this way? First thing is you may influence the policy debate a little bit. The second is, and you don't ever want to be the person who jumps up and does the I told you so dance when the proposed policy fails. But people remember. They say, oh, Don was at the table and he had another way of doing this that we didn't try. Maybe we should go back and look at that again. All right. So again, this would be someplace where you're in disagreement with policy. You don't think the policy chosen is really going to advance the goal. It's not going to advance the interest of the United States. I think there's a better way to do it. Or if you haven't figured out a better way to do it, this is not a good way to do it. Let's not proceed on this. Let's slow it down a little. This is a place bureaucrats often accuse of disobeying a president's orders. I haven't hardly ever seen that. I have seen bureaucrats slow roll because they feel like decisions are being made hastily without looking at all the possible decisions. I'll give you a recent example. Trump and Putin had a summit in Alaska. I, being outside the government, was free to say, and I did, that it wasn't well prepared. It wasn't prepared far enough in advance. The foreign ministers hadn't met. They hadn't been staffed out. It wasn't going to achieve anything because of all that. Okay. So let's say you're in the government and you're using your voice and it's slowing the decision-making process down a little. And one of the effects of that is the summit takes place much later and it's better prepared. That would have been a good move. Third, you can resign. Go back to my corollary, which is we don't want to get in a situation where half the Foreign Service resigns over conservative Republican policies, and then the other half resigns a few years later over a little liberal Democratic policies. That said, if you're asked to work on something that really offends your conscience, and you just can't deal with it, you resign. Option here, resign very publicly. I had a friend that resigned on the front page of the New York Times one time by giving an interview about why he was resigning, hoping to move the policy debate. Right. Now we're going to lose your expertise in the U.S. government unless you come back in a later administration. That's not good. This really needs to be something, I think, that's going beyond bad policy to offend your conscience. There are people, for instance, who work in a particular area. Let's say Eastern Europe. They work there most of their careers. They're real experts. And they see the government of the day doing something stupid. They may feel that resignation, particularly public resignation, is the best way to go. Next up, transfer to different duties. This is available, I think, more so in the State Department than a lot of other places. Now, I've worked a lot with foreign ministries overseas. My perception is they tend to finish out their tours. They don't leave mid-tour. Foreign Service leads mid-tour for various reasons. Military. I think this option would always, in theory, be there for the military. There's a very strong ethic in the military. If you don't leave an assignment early, you don't leave your buddies behind dealing with the mess, you try and stay. But we have the opportunity to transfer around. It would be very possible, and we had a speaker last year who talked about this in human rights context. It'd be very possible to go to your bosses and say, look, I'm really, really not comfortable with this policy. I don't want to work on it. I don't want my fingerprints on it. But these other 5 policies our organization's dealing with, I'm fine with it. Could you just transfer me over? Or, I've been thinking it's about time I did a tour in oceans environment science. I love the whales. Can we work a transfer there? Okay. So now your conscience is clean because you're not working on this policy that you think is terrible. Somebody else is going to have to do it. And you get to stay on in the organization. So that's a very live option. The 5th one exists, as far as I know, only in the U.S. Department of State, which is the Dissent cable or memo. The origins of this are very interesting. In 1971, I'm going to guess some of you were like this. I was 12 years old, and yet I was already paying attention to foreign affairs. And there was this interesting thing going on the Indian subcontinent. When India and Pakistan were split apart, somebody had the idea of having a West Pakistan and East Pakistan over 1,000 miles away. It'd be part of the same country. Didn't work. And by 1971, that was becoming there was a big independence movement in what's now Bangladesh. And they were doing all the right things. They weren't using violent means. They were using the ballot box. They were using public opinion. And they basically won an election, national election. And the next move was going to be to declare independence. And the Pakistani army invaded. And it was pretty rough. There was a lot of human rights violations. Finally, India said, hell with this. We can't have all this violence on our border. Sending all kinds of refugees into India. We're going to step in. And they stepped in and they beat the Pakistani military in a few days. And the nation of Bangladesh was born. Now, I'm reading about this in news magazines and newspapers. And there was a lot that was tugging at the heartstrings of America. Democracy, military, independence movement. We like independence movements. We had one. a lot of human rights violations, a lot of bad photos and stories. Everything you know about American public opinion would tell you that the U.S. would have intervened on behalf of Bangladesh and approved India's intervention. No, we tilted towards Pakistan. That's the word that's used in Indian foreign policy circles, and they resent it to this day. We tilted towards Pakistan. We even sent an aircraft carrier into the Bay of Bengal just to send the message to the Indians: don't go too far here. Don't try and take over Bangladesh. Why? Let's come back to what happened next. Remember, Bangladesh was not independent yet, so our diplomatic establishment at Dhaka was a consulate general. The consul general and his officers sent in a cable saying basically what I just said: human rights violations, democracy, American public opinion. Why in the world are we tilting towards India? That's the wrong policy. All of their career stuff. Why? Because unbeknownst to anybody, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger were working on a plan for Nixon to go to China. It was a history-changing event. China was a hermit kingdom. That visit started to bring them into the real world. It established diplomatic relations between the U.S. and China for the first time in 20 years. Pakistan was the go-between. Henry Kissinger was making trips to Pakistan to talk about the situation. It's not what he was doing at all. In the middle of the night, Pakistani secret airplane was flying him and Winston Hort up to Beijing for talks about the Nixon visit. Nobody knew. The guys in Dhaka who sent the cable didn't know. Well, this all became kind of famous. It was referred to as the Blood Telegram. There's an entire book written about it. For those of you interested in the Bangladesh situation, there's a great book that came out by a Bengali scholar years ago called 1971 that lays all that out. So Congress said, look, how can you ruin these guys' careers? You know, isn't this just a replay of what happened 20 years ago when we fired the China hands because they accurately said the communists were going to take over China whether we like it or not? We got to change this. So they pressured and got the Dissent channel cable. How does this work? Now those folks at the consulate in Dhaka would send in a classified cable. And the way the practice has evolved over the decades is that they work it with the policy planning staff, which reports to the secretary, acronym SP. Policy planning staff was founded by the great George Kennan. What it was supposed to be was a State Department think tank. It actually hasn't worked out that way. Sometimes it does do that, but other times it's just given various tasks. And this was one that was given. So usually what happens is you go back to SP and say, I'm thinking about sending Dissent channel cable. And they work with you and they give you some tips on how to make it more effective. It can also be a memo if it starts in Washington. And it goes in, it's for the eyes of the secretary, and they show it to certain other policymakers. Like one about Africa would usually be shared with the assistant secretary for Africa. And there are steps taken to protect the name of the officer sent it. So now here's the thing. On average, it's about one a week. And a lot of them are kind of small local issues that probably could have been dealt with just as effectively by going to the Office of the Inspector General and making a complaint or being a whistleblower. They really weren't big policy stuff at all. There's one article out there about the biggest memo. It was a memo in early 2017. It was about Trump's first term so-called Muslim ban, where we won't issue visas to Muslim countries, which later migrated towards we were going to hassle young men from Muslim countries before they get a visa. Everybody else okay. A couple critiques here. First one is what the policy planning staff will tell you is don't send in a cable just from you. See if you can round up some people in the embassy or neighboring embassies who believe the same way you do. Sending in 6, 10, 12 people, that's more effective. This was 1,000. So you had to first off, you had to have watered down language to get 1,000 people to sign it. But second, you had a lot of people who really didn't know much more about the issue than the average. And also, it was promptly leaked to the press by the person who wrote it. So not really the intended use of the Dissent channel memo. As one of my mentors pointed out, it had another flaw, which was that it was seeking to overturn a policy that the courts were probably going to overturn anyhow, which they did. So that's kind of one of the more famous examples. It's not a great example because it didn't follow the. Now, how could it have been more effective? I think it could have been more effective if it came from one of the embassies that was badly affected, like say the embassy in Cairo, that all of a sudden was having to deal with all these upset visa applicants who couldn't get a visa because it's Muslim ban. And maybe some people from another embassy in the region and some people in Washington that deal with the same issue, get the 12 people together, well-reasoned, send it up. In these cases, so you've got like the little local issues that probably shouldn't be dissent channel, and you got the occasional example of these big kind of for show dissent cables and memos that are going to create a lot of heat and light, but actually not move policy probably. For those of you who are fans of the West Wing, there's a great episode about a dissent channel memo about African issues, I believe. So now, let's go back to the 5 ways to dissent for a minute. Just following orders. Again, don't do that if you personally are being asked to do something that offends your conscience or violates the law. But if you're an apprentice and there's something going on up here at a high level and it really doesn't affect you directly, maybe your best option. Use your voice to influence the process. Are you going to get much opportunity to do this at a very junior level? No. But look, I was a desk officer 7 years in. I used my voice to influence the decision-making process about what we were going to do in Central Africa. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. Once every blue moon, people would come back to me and say, hey, we think you were right a couple months ago. Let's go back and revisit that. And every now and then I had to do that. I had to say, I was wrong. Okay, let's try something different. Next one's resign. I think you got to do this if you're being asked to do something by your conscience. And if you don't think one of the other possibilities, transfer to different duties, use the cable. Dissent process is appropriate. You can transfer to different duties. Or you can use the dissent cable. Now, it's interesting. In the dissent cable and memo process, you're basically saying, I'm not going to resign. I'm going to stay as a diplomat and try and influence these things in the future. You're also saying, I am not even going to try and transfer. You know, this is my expertise. This is what I work on. I just wish we were doing this different. And here's why. And see if you can move the needle. The one time I was involved in the dissent cable was there was an election in Nigeria. It was very controversial. And the U.S., without using the words free and fair, accepted the result. We basically thought that if the election had been held under ideal circumstances, the guy who won probably would have won it. And just move on down the road, help them work on their elections in the future. There were some officers at the embassy in Abuja who were very upset by this, and they sent in a dissent channel cable. And it was shown to the assistant secretary. Names were masked. We had a pretty good idea of who'd written it and didn't care. Thought they were a very good officer, and this is the way they felt. God bless them. Did it move our policy? No, not really. Definitely the same thing. But it was a registered, you know, and had there been, say, for instance, a big pro-democracy movement arise, or there had been protests against this president being sworn in, they would have looked right. Turns out none of those things happened. So I'm going to stop there, and in a minute we'll take questions.